You've probably tried to build a SaaS before. You likely have tons of failed projects like I do. It's starting to become apparent. Like building a SaaS, although people say it's easy, it's actually pretty difficult to do. Yes, there's boilerplates you can buy. Yes, there's a ton of templates you can use. But what usually happens is those solutions fall apart. You didn't code it, so now you're not familiar with it. It requires a ton of support. You're stuck in a Discord group chatting with people. It can be a long slog. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's easy to do, but it's definitely possible. And one of the first reasons why building a SaaS is so difficult is this analysis paralysis that happens to most people. You're overthinking a lot of the technical decisions. You don't know what choices to make. So you're stuck in this gridlock, always continuously evaluating tools. You're overwhelmed by these tools. There's a lot, just like Bolt, Cursor, V0. What do they do? What are they good for? Constantly trying to compare back and forth. You're also stuck in this start and stop cycle where you start something, you have some early wins, but then you can't really finish or follow through at all. And finally, you're scared to commit to these ideas, right? There sometimes the idea sounds good at the onset, but as you start working on it, you feel like there's another idea that's a little bit better, so you want to switch gears and go into something else. Now, these are the classic mistakes I've made while trying to build a couple SaaS products throughout the year. You've seen them on this channel. I've had 4 or 5 that I've tried to launch. I'm finally launching one. But these are some of the mistakes I've made. The first one is the like eternal hacker syndrome. This is the idea where constantly switching between frameworks. I was trying LangChain, Llama Index, Control Flow, a ton of AI frameworks I was trying before I decided to ditch the frameworks and just go with coding things from scratch myself. And it just resulted in me being definitely happier rather than trying to always keep up with those frameworks. The second one was zero process. I didn't have any process in place to go from idea to something live on a link. So every time I had a new idea, every time I wanted to start something, I was basically starting from scratch with no templates, no anything, and then trying to figure my way out through the entire process, which took a really long time each time. And then blind development. I didn't have a tracking system in place. I would just sit down and think, all right, what am I going to code today? And then start coding. Having a well defined process now, I actually know exactly what I'm going to do well ahead of time, weeks ahead of time before I actually do it. And then rushing implementations. I would find myself constantly trying to rush to get something done, but there was like no deadline. It was just like a thing where I wanted to finish my app in 15 minutes. But you have time. You definitely have time to get things correct. And I found that when you do it right up front, or you take a little bit of extra time up front, it just saves you a ton of maintenance time on the back end. Whenever I rushed, I got something out the door really quick. It was super buggy on the back end. It took forever to maintain, and what ended up leading me to scrap some of these projects. Okay, so with all those mistakes I was making, why am I still sticking with this idea of building out agents, especially putting them into a SaaS product? I think there's a unique advantage with using agents combined with the SaaS model, and it's really the underlying architecture. Looking at the architectures I was building before using agents, they were really complex. They had a lot of moving pieces to them. One particular component is like the state machine of a system and also the event management of a system was really complex to do before using agents. Basically, you can swap the agents out for those two systems. Now, you can also go vertical with your agents. If you give the agents a specific task on in a specific industry, they perform really well out of the box instead of you having to hard code all that knowledge up front. And then the rapid development. So not only throwing your agents into the architecture makes it easier to build these more sophisticated systems, you can also use the agents to build the system. So now with tools like Cursor, Bolt, V0, Windsurf, these are really taking a heavy lift away from, and you can essentially move as quickly as a team of 10 people. Now, the other part of this is like outcome based pricing. Instead of looking at per seed or looking at trying to charge people on usage, you can just define upfront a specific structure, return that from your agents, and charge people based on that structure. Now, a lot of data processing has to happen before you give people back those things, but I can go into a couple examples later. And the final thing is one person multiplied. I mentioned this before, but one person could essentially function like a team of 10 in multiple domains. For example, if you are someone who is running a lean operation, you only bring on contractors when you need to, you can effectively give one contractor in the marketing area access to agentic tools, and they are able to effectively run campaigns for you, write the emails, write all, do initial drafts of content, summarize things, do posting, that one person can do a lot more now. So the same applies to folks like you who are building out these SaaS products. You don't need to have an entire developer team just to build out the initial version of your project, maybe even the second version of your project. The question then becomes, can you build reliable and adaptable architectures over time on a repeated basis? And one of these architectures I look at is, this is how I design my APIs these days. And it's meant to be flexible, and it's not meant to be something where it's easy to set up, at least on the first end, but it's really easy to update. So let's say I want to add a new feature. All I need to do is put in a new queue here, maybe add something to this agent plane, maybe add something to this agent plane. Usually my control plane is not changing much, and it's interacting with all of my billing providers, my identity providers, and my model providers. All that stuff is interacting with these different planes, and I know exactly where to go in to make edits. Before, when I was working on some of my projects, I would try to do one big monolith thing and then try to make all my changes. Everything was on top of each other. It was very difficult to do. And now I also have something where it's like a SaaS identity. This is not a concept I made up, but it's a very known concept in SaaS land. And that kind of handles like all my billing, all the auth for the user. And so every time I set up a new system, I basically just plug and play this and it works. To make this concrete for you, I'm going to walk through how a AI tool would interpret this. And my tools of choice are Cursor. I'm also using OpenAI's O1 model now. It just recently dropped. So we're also going to see how this performs as well. But the overall point I want to make is, this is a very general infrastructure pattern here. And what I'm doing is applying a specific use case to it, or something that I'm going to implement for my code base. But this pattern translates across any type of SaaS that I'm building at this point. And the specific prompt I'm using today is, explain how I would add an endpoint post score with a JSON body, video URL, and then I'm adding specific components of the architecture, the infra, the orchestrator, and the agent plane. I'm also throwing in a library just to see how well it performs. And then I describe how I want the code written. One of the things to call out too is the guidelines that I'm using. This is where I, ahead of time, wrote out what are the different responsibilities and the descriptions of the different folders, the folder structure, and also listing out where to add things. So I took the time to do this a while back, and I just copy and paste this into projects, or I put them in the Cursor rules as well, just to help the model along. We're going to do like a mini code review, similar to how I would look at this in my real workflow. I'm not going to implement anything today. I'm just going to critique what the model's written. And so the first step here is adding something to the infrastructure, which makes sense. I'm using SST on the back end, which I really like, and they have a very specific way of adding in API routes. So this looks correct to me. Next, it's going to attack the orchestrator adapter. And this is where I would want to see it interact with the SaaS identity. And we do get that here. So it's basically getting a valid user from the event that is sent in, the request itself, making sure that one, the user has paid. That means they've gone into Stripe, they've paid for the service. And then two, that they're authenticated. Whatever identity provider I'm using, I tend to use Clerk on the back end. So that will ensure that the user is actually authenticated to use the rest of the system. And from here, it creates this scoring task as well, and then it publishes the task. Now, I would like to see the topic publisher only happen in the secondary, but that's okay. That's something I can change later on. And then it just wires up the new orchestrator. It does get correct that it needs to hit the orchestrator.api, but it doesn't really wire it up correctly. I would have to come in and fix that. And it does call out creating a new queue message filter for the topic, which is good. Then some instructions here on what to do next. I do like that it creates a primary adapter in the agent plane. This looks almost spot on to what I would rate as well. And then it does go into getting the actual transcript. So it does a use case for the transcript, and it does a use case for analyzing the transcript as well. So this is good. It split it up and made it easier to edit later on. And then finally, it does make some more updates to a queue. So this is the actual queue that we would need here. It's not just the filtering message. And then it writes a handler for using the agent plane scoring. So it didn't get the final piece all the way. I would like to have seen some OpenAI code in this. But overall, it's a definitely a good start here for something that's very custom to me. And I can see if I made some updates to some of the prompts and some of the updates to this prompt as well, and I went back and forth with it, I could probably get it to work really well. But overall, if this was something I just spun up real quick, I definitely would just be able to edit it and work on it maybe 20, 30 minutes. I'd get it working at some point. Or I could refine this as a specification and throw it to Devin and then use Devin on the back end to iterate with it if I was like going out to get a coffee or doing something else with my day at this point. So overall, yeah, this pattern applies. And the more you use this, the more you'll see exactly where the model is missing and messing up. And you can also just tweak and fine tune this, especially if you're implementing something that's a lot more complicated than just a single endpoint. It's going to take a lot more work to make these models understand your code bases. And the key part that I want to come back to is this SaaS identity that I got right. This is all wired up pre the model going in and making these updates. So now all I have to be concerned about when I'm implementing this feature is just getting the business logic and making sure the other half of this is correct. So it got like the other half of it pretty bad, but the orchestrator pattern, it followed pretty well. So mostly, you just wanna have something where it's very clear and cut where you need to make updates. So now that you have a good idea of this overall system, this is actually still pretty custom to me, and I know exactly where to go in and make updates. What is best is to zoom out and understand the different types of systems. So let's actually go into how that works. The first one is a workflow automation. And usually workflow automations can be a script like a Python script or a Golang script, but most people just use Zapier, Make, those other like RPA tools. That's a traditional workflow type system. And when I talk about SaaS, and in this respect, what I'm talking about is service as software. So you're building out a piece of software and then you're providing it as a service to people. They can pay for those blueprints that you provide them, or they can pay for an implementation that you do. Now, this is the hardest work to do because it requires that you go into the client, know their process, and if they are not at a level where they can actually leverage the automations, you have to bring them up to that level. So there is some digital transformation work in there. Type 2 is the agent as an API. This has a little bit more leverage compared to type 1. And in this version, what you're really doing is you're selling access to the API. If people are technical enough and they have the ability to ping your API with your SDK or you're giving people API keys, this works pretty well. The only problem is it's usually really hard to market these type of tools. So you're going to get into this place where it's really hard to market. You need a developer portal. Developers usually just don't want to pay for these type of things. These are hard to do, but is an essential type of system to know how to build because it leads you into the third type of system. And this one is agents as a team. This is where you actually take your APIs, you package it up, and then you throw a UI interface on in the front of it, and you're able to then interact with your team of agents via a customized UI. Now, this isn't a workflow automation. It's basically a CRUD interface, maybe a little bit more complex than that. But what you're doing is giving some input to your team of agents and then getting back an output. We don't care how it's happening, and it should be happening over an API endpoint, but I just want the result. I don't really care about all of the nitty-gritty details underlying the actual agent team, especially that architecture I showed you before. So type 4 is the pay per outcome. This is where you take your agent team and now you're shipping it to different teams, different businesses, different individuals, and they're paying you for an outcome based on your agents. This is a fairly new type of system. It requires a little bit of reconfiguring on your SaaS identity and your billing provider, but you're able to get to this pretty quickly if you're building in the way I just showed you before. And how do you know you can do these things? How do you beat that paralysis? It's basically a question I asked myself this year was, do you have a playbook? What I realized is I don't have a playbook. I need a playbook to get through all of this noise and get through all of the advancements that are happening now. But I also need a playbook that helps me go from an idea all the way to something that I can actually ship, actually publish. Because without a playbook, what you end up doing is wasting a lot of time. And so the playbook I have is actually really simple. The idea is one, I start with some specifications. I never start coding right away. Then I build a clickable prototype. This is when I'm free to use whatever tool I want, whatever AI agent coding tool I want to use here, and just build something quick, something I just want to see the user interface, see if it works. Here I might even, reach out to some people and give them this little user interface, have a couple phone calls, validate the idea. If you can get paid, even better. Then going with the agentic API. This is where you're actually building things out. We're going to make it a little bit more concrete here and give it an actual endpoint that you can hit and get some responses back from. And then the landing page is where you're going to start doing some marketing. You're going to throw some advertising dollars behind it, or maybe you're going to post it on your socials, do some type of push to get people to that marketing landing page so that they can either opt in to a wait list or start purchasing the product. And then the dashboard. The dashboard is where you're focused on delivering that outcome that we're talking about here. You don't want to focus too much on delivering an outcome via the API because that's going to be a harder sell. You want to focus on giving an outcome via the dashboard first, something people can just use and get in and out very easy. And then you can move into providing API access to maybe enterprise level clients or enterprise level customers. Okay, you're probably asking yourself, how do I actually implement this entire playbook here? I got you. If you need a step-by-step walkthrough, then hop into my paid community. That's where I go through each of these specific sections of this playbook. I also apply it to a SaaS application that I'm building, and I also give you a ton of insights you can use for the projects that you're working on. You'll have access to a ton of resources, diagrams, and even my GitHub code that I'm using as a reference as well. And you can even chat with me a bit. You can get all of the latest and greatest on this. Probably by the time you watch this, a couple of things will have changed. That's where you can get all the latest updates. Now we've done somewhat of a deep dive on the entire agentic SaaS idea. Let's actually return back to the basics and really describe what is this service as a software model. The service as a software model means you're charging for some type of outcome. And the closer you can get to that, the better. And how I learned about this was going to ChatGPT or Claude and entering this type of prompt. I cleaned this prompt up to make it easier to use. Asking it to, hey, use this service as a software concept. There's a couple articles out there, so it should pick that up. Include a brief description, the core value proposition, and then the payment model. So this could be like a pay per report, pay for analytics summary, or some type of small subscription that is very directly tied to some outcome. When I put that prompt into ChatGPT, and Ask Engine Optimization was a good one where you could produce a SaaS application that if someone enters in their brand name, you get back a report that says, this is how you show up in ChatGPT, this is how you show up in Perplexity, this is how you show up in Claude. This is how you show up in other engines that are chat based and AI based instead of just Google, which is an SEO based search. Market research on demand. This is one I actually pay for one of these type of SaaS tools where you can send off an agent to go do some industry related research. Now, this is not a generic search on one of these ask engines. It's more of a deep dive on the market opportunities, the total addressable market TAM, these different metrics that you want to track when you're looking to go into a specific sector. Feature prioritization service. This one is probably more for developers, and this could be an agent that looks at your customer surveys, your reviews, and then takes all that information and then suggests tiny features that you can add to your product over time that would improve customer satisfaction. And this would be like a pay per analysis type thing. So you can send it off and say, hey, do an analysis for me every month, bring me back some ideas, and that would be helpful in terms of guiding where you're going for your product. The last one here is competitive pricing benchmarking service. That is a mouthful, but this could be a agent that goes out, looks at all your competitors. Let's say you're in the e-commerce space, looks at all the competitors in that space, gets all the prices, puts them all together into a report and tells you like everything's trending up, trending down. So different little pieces like that. I'm not an e-commerce guy, so this would be something not in my realm. This would be another one where it's like a pay per report, or you could charge it as a monthly subscription just so the person can get updates maybe daily because that space moves pretty quickly. Okay, so let's talk about one of these market research use cases. If I open this up here, what you get is a very detailed report on thousands of businesses in the software publishing space. Now, this isn't SaaS specifically, but SaaS is mentioned throughout this report. If I wanted to get this report, I could purchase it, and there's a couple options. I could pay a subscription, which is about $1,000, and I get a 3-month trial, which is not bad. And this is all billed up front. Or I could pay for the report itself for about $1,000 and just get that single report. They also have a custom plan here where you can go in and start working with a ton of reports. You can get a consultant on the back end for that. That's great. I think this is a fair price for all of the research that has to go into this. But what's happening now is people are looking at this business model and they're using agents to supplant this business model. So there's this agent called Agent Herbie, which is allows you to basically email it, and you can email it anything. It'll just research the topic really in depth for you. And it's built for people who are probably like in venture capital, who are deep in finance. But it's also good if you just want a quick overview of the landscape on a specific industry. And so I used Agent Herbie to produce a very similar report to what I would get if I had just paid. Now, is it at the same caliber as that? Probably not, but it's good enough. Here, I get a lot of information, and it's specific to the AI agent opportunity for SaaS founders. Now, this is a very detailed report that goes into market size, different metrics that could be important if you were targeting like enterprise versus startups, if you were going into a specific country. So these are a lot of different metrics at a high level. Sources are cited. If I didn't know anything about this space, this is what I would need to get some good insight into it. And so when I talk about service as software, this is a service as a software. I am getting a report back that I can use to make decisions down the line. And I think that's the trend that's going to happen with AI agents and the SaaS model. And so as I scroll through this, there's a ton of information here. I'm not going to walk through all this information, but you'll see in terms of strategy, what gives me a couple of quick insights into different strategies that I can go into, and it's some example companies that I could look at if I wanted to understand the specific strategy. So there's autonomous AI agents here, which is the strategy everyone's going for, obviously. There's multi-agent systems, AI-powered SaaS platforms, kind of what I'm talking about today. And then AI for sales optimization, and then cybersecurity is another one. It gives you some example companies. Palantir is on this list. Of course, Google and OpenAI is going to be on this list for multi-agent systems as well. And then it even gives me a deep dive on messaging that would resonate with customers. The biggest one is probably cost effectiveness. People want to use AI agents to make it more cost effective to do things. Also scalability, so that ability to use agents in parallel to complete multiple tasks. Back to what I was talking about with the one person, multiple domains idea. And then it talks about even sales approaches and techniques. So I don't want to go too much into this report, but I had this run multiple reports for me like this. And it's an advantage in this time where I don't have access to high paying consultants from the best firms or anything. I can just use this agent to supplement that as well. So as you're working on your idea, and as you're working through building out your agentic SaaS, you can use other agents to help you build a SaaS, not only in coding, but also on the marketing side, on the researching side, on the sales side as well. If you want this entire report, I forget how much I actually paid for this, but you can have it as long as you're a paid member of my community. I'll just include it inside of the show notes in the community. And you can go through this. I think take some time to read through this and understand the real opportunity here that is AI agents with this SaaS. Now, it's not gonna be easy. You still have to compete, you still gotta market, you still gotta sell, but definitely this gives you a little bit of a leg up in understanding where everything is at this current moment and how to actually navigate this entire landscape. Hopefully this is helpful.